Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 6 wide receiver rankings for the 2020 fantasy football season. On today's episode, of course, we're going to be covering a variety of topics, starting around with some news around the National Football League. A couple running backs that were on yesterday's running back rankings video. We'll have different scenarios. Melvin Gordon and Le'Veon Bell. There's some news regarding both those guys. We'll cover it on today's episode. Then after that, I want to talk about matchups at the wide receiver and running back position. Which defenses are giving up the most points to opposing wide receivers and running backs in a half PPR scoring basis on average thus far this season, who has the most advantageous matchup going into week 6. Then we'll talk about, of course, my top 36 wide receiver rankings. Before we begin today's episode, I want to thank you guys for the incredible support. I think we're nearly 100 subscribers. I think it's less than 100 subscribers away from 30,000. So if you have not yet already, click that subscribe button, join the community. We're making fantasy football content here on the daily for the entirety of the season. Making a Google account is free. Subscribing is free. Make sure you go ahead and do that. Make sure while you're down there subscribing to the channel, timestamps are down below in the description of the video. So if you're looking for a specific player, you can go ahead and find that. Outside of that, if you want more content from myself, you can go to patreon.com/AndrewKiorkof. Information regarding that in the description. Make sure you click the like button, leave a comment. I appreciate it. Read all of them. And outside of that, I'm ready to begin. Hopefully you guys are. So we've got a lot of information to cover today. And I'm trying to do this quickly. I don't want you guys to be here for too long, but here's the deal. So Le'Veon Bell yesterday, just before kickoff between the Tennessee Titans and the Buffalo Bills, pretty interesting game to say the very least there. Le'Veon Bell was cut by the New York Jets. Now yesterday, I think I had him around the rank number 26, talking about how Adam Gase doesn't want him on the team, never really wanted him. And the little bit of a rumor came out yesterday morning that they were going to potentially trade him. Obviously, with his contract, nobody wants anything to do with that. They don't want to have to pay Le'Veon Bell. So, unfortunately, he was cut and released. Now, for him, this is the best possible scenario. Where he's going to land, I'm not 100% certain. But if you're a Le'Veon Bell owner and you've had him and you've kept him on your injured reserve spot for the last couple of weeks, I don't think you should let him go. I mean, potentially, if somebody wants to come and take him off your hands and trade for him, you can. But there is always, there's a potential that somebody could go down in the coming weeks and he could fill in as an RB1 of one of these, franchises going forward. Now, obviously, it'd be on a 1-year deal, but the whole thing is, in terms of fantasy production, this is a 3-down back. This is a guy that, if and when he's healthy, can be a number 1 wide receiver and running back on the exact same team. So he's got a lot of value and upside. We just got to see where he's going to land. Obviously, I'm hoping he doesn't land somewhere where it's going to kill the value of another running back. Like if he lands in Kansas City, CEH is in jeopardy. If he lands in Chicago, David Montgomery is going to be in jeopardy. If he lands in Philadelphia, what is going to happen with Miles Sanders? These are all the questions that I'm worried about. And again, there doesn't really seem like there are many open spots in the National Football League. I wouldn't be surprised if the Seahawks went and grabbed them. Just saying. All right, anyway, outside of Le'Veon Bell, the potential of him going throughout the fantasy season, a little bit earlier today, there was a little bit of a report out of Denver saying that last night, Melvin Gordon was arrested for a DUI. Driving under the influence, very unfortunate. Here's the deal. Philip Lindsay's healthy and coming back. This upcoming week, they take on the New England Patriots. But regardless, if Melvin Gordon is going to be suspended by the team, or he's going to have to deal with these off-the-field issues, he could be missing some time. And if that's the possible case, then Philip Lindsay is going to definitely take the number 1 running back spot here and have himself some incredible value. We've seen the opportunity that Melvin Gordon's got over the last couple of weeks, nearly getting 20 touches a game. That kind of opportunity in the hands of Philip Lindsay. We've seen him be productive. We've seen him be a top 12 back in 2018, his rookie season, and even have back-to-back 1,000 yards seasons on the ground. So again, there's a lot of potential there. Keep an eye on Philip Lindsay because he is definitely available in many of your leagues, considering he's been out with an injury. Outside of that, let's go ahead and start talking about my wide receiver matchups and talking about which potential defenses are giving up the most points to opposing wide receivers thus far this season. Let's throw that on screen right now. So, as you can see on screen, everything seems to be the same as last week, almost entirely. I mean, I thought 6 weeks would kind of give it a little bit more stability and give us a little bit better of an understanding of how terrible some of these defenses are in terms of their secondary, but I guess it's kind of stayed consistent. The Seattle Seahawks, the Dallas Cowboys, the Cleveland Browns, 3 teams that are heavily struggling in the secondary, are always going to give great matchups to opposing wide receivers. Again, the Seattle Seahawks, even though they are on bye week this upcoming week, along with the Los Angeles Chargers, the New Orleans Saints, and the Las Vegas Raiders. Again, you always want to take care of or take advantage of said matchup. Now, Dallas Cowboys, DeAndre Hopkins, that's going to be a great Monday night game. The Cleveland Browns playing against the Pittsburgh Steelers, Chase Claypool, JuJu Smith-Schuster, they're going to be able to take advantage of that. But speaking of Chase Claypool and JuJu Smith-Schuster, the Pittsburgh Steelers are giving up the 4th most points to opposing wide receivers, despite having one of the best pass rushers and front sevens in terms of stopping the run in the National Football League. Their secondary has been abysmal as of late, and they've been giving up a lot of points. And this isn't something of new. I mean, we go back to week 1. Darius Slayton, 2 receiving touchdowns with Daniel Jones. I mean, Daniel Jones went on a 3-week streak of not throwing a passing touchdowns after that Pittsburgh game. But against Pittsburgh, he was perfectly fine throwing 2 touchdowns. So again, that secondary, not been looking great. Maybe perhaps Baker Mayfield, when they are not able to run the ball, him, Odell Beckham Jr., Jarvis Landry, Austin Hooper, that receiving core can get something going this upcoming week. The Minnesota Vikings, of course, with their inexperienced cornerbacks and the injuries that they've faced defensively, that's definitely been a struggle for them. They take on the Atlanta Falcons. It'll probably be Calvin Ridley who takes advantage of it because their chances are Julio's going to miss this week once again. Outside of that, the Denver Broncos. We'll see who's at quarterback for the Patriots. I mean, Julian Edelman's probably the best play there regarding that. Philadelphia Eagles will be taking on the Baltimore Ravens, Marquise Brown. The Atlanta Falcons, of course, giving up a bunch of yards to opposing wide receivers. Adam Thielen, who is currently the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy, and his teammate Justin Jefferson could take advantage of that. Now, in terms of the tougher matchups at the wide receiver position, the Los Angeles Rams have not allowed anything. I mean, they are only giving up 20.54 points in a half PPR scoring format to opposing wide receivers. That does not bode well for Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk this week, and especially Jimmy Garoppolo, who's struggled heavily this past week, has to have himself another tough matchup. The Chicago Bears, they've been playing tough against opposing wide receivers. Of course, Robby Anderson's been extremely consistent, and we saw a little bit of a kind of resurgence from DJ Moore this past week. Unfortunately, they have another tough matchup, the Washington football team, playing against Darius Slayton. That's going to be a little bit tough for him, but I think he by himself can easily carry the team there because, again, Daniel Jones has no one else to throw the ball towards. The Arizona Cardinals playing against Andy Dalton, that's really going to be a good test for them. I think, obviously, they've got an extremely talented wide receiver core there, and it's up to Andy Dalton to see whether or not he can produce. Now, we're also going to make sure that before we get into our top 36 wide receiver rankings, I wanted to also talk about running back matchups. I wasn't able to talk about it on yesterday's video because, of course, week 5 wasn't over, and I did not have the graphic for it because I get these graphics from Yahoo. So again, let's go ahead and throw this up. In terms of who's giving up the most points to opposing running backs this season, the Carolina Panthers, the Green Bay Packers, the Detroit Lions, and the Las Vegas Raiders. I mean, on average, these guys are just giving up a boatload of yards. I mean, all these teams within the top 7 are giving up at least 1+ touchdown on the ground per game to opposing running backs on top of the insane yardage, whether it's on the ground or through the air. So just taking advantage of this. Again, David Montgomery against the Carolina Panthers this week. That'll be great. Ronald Jones against Green Bay. Even Leonard Fournette, if he's healthy, ready to go. We talked about James Robinson for a reason as a top 5 running back this week because Detroit is horrible against the run. The Vegas Raiders are on a bye week. The New York Jets, Myles Gaskin could potentially be able to take advantage of that. I'm hoping he's able to do so. Again, this isn't a run-first team, but when they're leading, they end up relying upon Myles Gaskin a lot, which is exciting to see going forward. Again, Derrick Henry against Houston. We've seen him have some incredible games there. But these are the easiest matchups at the running back position. In terms of the tougher ones, of course, the Denver Broncos. Can Damian Harris and James White be able to at least produce some relevant statistics this upcoming week and at least function properly enough to where they can at least give us some sort of productive fantasy week? We'll just have to wait and see. The San Francisco 49ers still stout against the run. Indianapolis Colts, Pittsburgh Steelers, Baltimore Ravens, New England Patriots. These are all defenses that you typically don't want to play your opposing running backs against. But again, these guys have played well, and it gets tricky when your starting running back has to play against them because sometimes you just got to play your studs, and sometimes you just got to sit them regardless, but just depends on the matchups. Either way, now that we've covered that, we can go ahead and we can start talking about my top 36 wide receiver rankings. Thank you everybody for, again, getting this far in the video. If you like today's video and today's content and the content that I usually make sure you click that like button. I really do appreciate it. It makes a big difference when we can get to 1,000+ likes. It really does help the algorithm and get this video out to more viewers so I can help other people win some fantasy championships this year. Okay, anyway, so let's go ahead and start off. Let's get through these top 36 wide receiver rankings quickly. When I say quickly, I mean it's literally going to take 40 minutes, but regardless, let's get into it. My number 1 wide receiver on the week is DeAndre Hopkins. We've got an updated picture for him, and he's looking good because he's playing good. DeAndre Hopkins right now in a half PPR scoring format, I think is the number 4 wide receiver. A lot of people would think, Andrew, prior to the season, you really didn't have DeAndre Hopkins slated as the number 1, but every single week you have him as the number 1 wide receiver because he's been incredible. I mean, just this past week, 6 catches for 131 yards and a touchdown, 22.1 fantasy points. But the thing is, DeAndre Hopkins is in this number one conversation every single week because think about the other wide receivers. Davante Adams, Michael Thomas, Julio Jones, they've all been hurt. But again, DeAndre Hopkins is stepping up to the plate, and he's proven that with, Kyler Murray, it doesn't really slow down. He is making Kyler Murray better, and their chemistry starting to build. This upcoming week, they play against the second easiest matchup in terms of points given up to opposing wide receivers. He should be able to feast against this Dallas Cowboys secondary. I'm excited for DeAndre Hopkins' potential this week. Number 2, Davante Adams with a little bit of an updated picture. Now, the last time we saw Davante Adams obviously went down with an injury against the Detroit Lions, but the week prior to that, he was incredible against the Minnesota Vikings. I'm excited about Davante Adams. He's already returned to practice. I heard an interview earlier this week on the Pat McAfee show with Aaron Rodgers talking about they're getting number 17 back this week. They obviously could have played him the week prior against the Atlanta Falcons prior to their bye week, but they wanted to give him a little bit more rest with the hamstring injury, not force him back because, again, they're trying to win a Super Bowl this year. They're undefeated for a reason, and they're going to get there. Davante Adams with Allen Lazard gone and the way that this offense is functioning. If Robert Tonyan's going to catch 3 touchdowns, just imagine when you get Davante Adams back into this offense, what exactly he's going to be able to produce, especially against Tampa Bay. In my opinion, that secondary has not played well. Allen Robinson was able to destroy them as much as he was able to. Unfortunately, wasn't able to score a touchdown, but I think Davante Adams will be able to get that done. He's my number 2 on the week. We have ourselves number 3, Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, is literally the number 1 wide receiver in a half PPR scoring format right now. I mean, a lot of people early in the season, after that week 1 and 2 inconsistency, they were like, I want to get out of this situation. I don't want to deal with Adam Thielen. Let's not forget, guys, in the 2018 season, Adam Thielen from weeks 1 through 9 was the number 1 wide receiver. He had 8 consecutive games of 100 receiving yards, and he was unstoppable. Just because Adam Thielen has a little bit of inconsistency doesn't mean that he's not the old Adam Thielen. I mean, just this past week against Seattle, one of the easiest matchups, and was obviously able to take advantage of it. 13 targets for 9 receptions, 80 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. That kind of production you can't find anywhere else. In my opinion, the fact that he's the number 1 wide receiver isn't that much of a surprise considering how productive he's been in the team, at least being able to get him the ball as often as they have. And the fact that he's scoring touchdowns. Not a lot of people score touchdowns, but when you're getting 2 a game in multiple contests, that makes a huge difference. He plays against Atlanta this week. That secondary's been struggling. That team has been struggling. Should be a great one for him. Speaking of scoring touchdowns, a guy that has scored a touchdown at least once every single week this year is Tyreek Hill. And that's why Tyreek Hill is always in this conversation. Besides the fact that he's always got the ability to pop off for an incredible play. Only 3 catches this past week, but it's 78 receiving yards that he totals. He had 1 rushing touchdown down on the goal line. They always use his speed with that jet motion sweep kind of offense. It's beautiful. The thing I also wanted to mention is that Tyreek Hill right now is in that top 5-6 wide receiver conversation. If he ends up getting that 70-yard touchdown and it doesn't get called back on a holding call, we have ourselves Tyreek Hill as a number 1 or 2 wide receiver going forward. Again, Tyreek Hill had a 70-yard touchdown, called back on a holding call. He's got that ability. He's got that upside. Sammy Watkins going to be missing time. They're going to have to rely upon him even that much more. He's an exciting player. He's scoring touchdowns. He's got a lot of upside. I'm excited about Tyreek Hill this week. Playing against Buffalo on Monday night. That secondary didn't look great. That defense didn't look great overall. Patrick Mahomes coming off a loss. Here comes the revenge game. Moving on, we have ourselves Calvin Ridley. Again, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, Julio Jones is probably going to miss. That being the case, Calvin Ridley's been incredible. 10 targets, 8 catches, $136, 17.6 fantasy points. The touchdown upside, we'll get there. They play against Minnesota. We've talked about them. They do not have enough talent in the secondary. Sure, their safeties are great. Harrison Smith is an all-pro every single year. That's fantastic. But their cornerbacks, Mike Hughes, the rookie cornerbacks, the 2 of them that they have not been up to par. Obviously, as they gain more experience, as the year progresses, they will improve. But Calvin Ridley in this offense should be able to take advantage of it. If Matt Ryan can just clean up some of his messes and really not just throw the ball. He literally fed the ball to a defender in the red zone. I mean, you throw that ball away, you give your team another shot. We got some opportunities. But again, Calvin Ridley should be a fantastic option. He's going to be scoring touchdowns soon. I just mark my words. He's going to be great. Moving on to our next wide receiver, we have someone that's playing against the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's Kenny Golladay. Now, prior to going on bye week, just this past week in week 5, Kenny Golladay came off of a hamstring injury and was looking great. He was averaging 14 fantasy points a game. And in the past 2 games, he's had a total of 15 targets, 10 receptions, 109 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns. 14.5 about fantasy points per game, which is fantastic. This upcoming week, they take on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Again, that secondary isn't the greatest. They're not a defense that is going to be able to stop you every single time you get them down the field. their team as a whole has not been fantastic. And just looking at what Will Fuller and Brandin Cooks were able to do against them, you bring a big-bodied receiver like Kenny Golladay into the mix, and you have yourself a recipe for success. I think a lot of people are still sleeping on Kenny Golladay and his potential. We haven't seen a lot of him, but when he and Matthew Stafford get on the same page, they're going to be unstoppable. This duo is going to be putting up a lot of fantasy points, and I'm excited about that going into week 6. Moving on to our next wide receiver, we have ourselves number 7, Allen Robinson, and the potential of Allen Robinson just continues to grow. With Nick Foles under center, I mean, he's going to see targets that he's really never seen before. I mean, at the back end of the 2019 season, he was getting a great amount of targets from Trubisky, but nothing like this. I mean, 16 targets. That was tied amongst, I think it was tied for first amongst all wide receivers just this past week. I think he tied with Stefon Diggs, but again, 16 targets for Allen Robinson, leading to 10 catches, 90 receiving yards. Those numbers are just going to continue to rise. There were a couple passes that he dropped. There was a pass that he bobbled and it was intercepted. He could have easily had way more stats and even potentially a touchdown this past week. And that's just going to continue to get better. They play against Carolina this upcoming week. I think the matchup is great. I think Nick Foles eventually is going to get a little bit more chemistry with this offense as the first team quarterback. Now that he's taking first team reps every week at practice, it's only going to get better with him and Allen Robinson. I think Robinson this upcoming week against Carolina, a great play. Stefon Diggs, the other receiver that had 16 targets this past week. I mean, Stefon Diggs last night, though he was able to gain a lot of stats, 16 targets, 10 receptions, 106 receiving yards, plays against Kansas City this upcoming week. Majority of, Stefon Diggs' work yesterday was, I'm going to run a 15-yard comeback every single time, and it was unstoppable. And they really couldn't, bottle him up. Sure, I'd like to see Stefon Diggs try to take the top off the defense. Obviously, not having John Brown on the field makes it a little bit limited to pull some pressure away from Stefon Diggs, but regardless, he was fantastic. He is the go-to in this offense, and he's one of these top 5 wide receivers in fantasy right now. He's had 3 100-yard receiving games thus far this season, and he's not slowing down. The touchdown upside is always there. Playing against KC, KC's secondary isn't immune to a great wide receiver, and I think the talent that Buffalo has at receiver, whether it's Gabriel Davis coming and filling in for John Brown if he's healthy, Cole Beasley, of course, and Stefon Diggs, I think they'll be able to spread out this defense and have themselves a pretty good week on the Monday night matchup coming forth. But either way, I think Stefon Diggs is another great play. Now, another player that I wanted to mention from yesterday's Tuesday night football game, A.J. Brown. Coming back from the bone bruise, looked fantastic. 9 targets, 7 receptions, got himself a touchdown, 82 receiving yards, plays against the Houston Texans. Now, you just got to go look it up for yourself. Against the Houston Texans, A.J. Brown is a different animal. Over 130 receiving yards in both games against them last year. Scored a touchdown in both games against them last season. I think this secondary, this defense, sure, Houston played a lot better against Jacksonville, but the way that the Tennessee Titans played last night, they're fresh, they're ready to go, and I think they're ready to send a message to this AFC South in the force of, hey, we're no one to mess around with. A.J. Brown's going to be able to impose his will on this defense. Tannehill looked fantastic, and I think this offense and A.J. Brown getting back into this top 12 conversation like he was at the end of last season should be fantastic going forward. We have ourselves number 10, Chris Godwin. Now, Chris Godwin, I'm expecting to play. He was practicing earlier this week. Should be fantastic coming back from the hamstring injury. If, in fact, he has any sort of setback this week, obviously they're going to sit him. But against Green Bay, I think this is a great matchup. I mean, when I look at Chris Godwin, his opportunity that he's already gotten this season with Brady, he's found great production. He's scored multiple times with Brady in the lineup. But the question is, what exactly are we going to see from Brady and this Tampa Bay offense? If in fact Scotty Miller can get 8 targets and Cameron Brate can get 8 targets and even guys like Tyler Johnson can pull 6 targets in a singular game, I expect Chris Godwin to get 10 targets every single game from here on out. That's the kind of opportunity he should be getting, and that's how this offense should function if and when he's healthy. If that's the case, he's easily going to be a top 12 quarterback because this offense can move the ball. Brady has always loved using the slot receiver, and I think Chris Godwin, though he's been injured, can eventually get back on the horse and get himself into this top 10 wide receiver conversation. I expect him to do so this week if in fact he's healthy and ready to go. Amari Cooper is my number 11, despite the quarterback change. I understand, last week we talked about Amari Cooper being the most targeted wide receiver, having, close to the most receiving yards, the most receptions around the National Football League. Touchdowns were the only difference to getting him over the hump on a weekly basis to a 20 point per week kind of average. Again, Amari Cooper was great, but unfortunately this past week when Dak went down, the offense kind of stuttered, and Amari Cooper wasn't utilized as much. Sure, CeeDee Lamb was great. Late in the game, Michael Gallup was utilized a lot from Andy Dalton, and we don't know what we're going to see. I mean, Andy Dalton might find his number 1 target in Gallup or in CeeDee Lamb, and it might not be Amari Cooper, and we're just going to have to wait and see. But I think Amari Cooper is far too talented and far too utilized in this offense for Andy Dalton to not go to him. Again, Amari Cooper has been a guy that's been getting 10 targets a week, not by accident. It's because he's open majority of the time. And I think going forward in this Arizona matchup, I expect Andy Dalton to feed him the rock. And I think going forward, we don't really have to worry about Amari Cooper finding himself some production. I think Andy Dalton will be able to at least help him out in fantasy. We move on to Mike Evans. Now, when we talk about Mike Evans, scores a touchdown at least every week. The amount of touchdowns he scored in the goal line, he is their goal line back practically. He is eating up everything, whether it's a slant or a fade. It doesn't really matter. He's going to catch everything on the goal line. Now, going into this upcoming week in Green Bay, it should be a back and forth matchup. Now, Green Bay's obviously going to score at will, and it's going to be up to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to be able to at least get themselves down the field consistently enough to give Mike Evans and Chris Godwin more opportunities. Now that Chris Godwin's back, it's going to help out Mike Evans more. There's another receiver on the field that can pull away some pressure on the opposite side, whether it's in the slot, and give him a couple one-on-one opportunities that in the last couple weeks he hasn't had. He's been double covered for a majority of the last couple games, and that isn't, by accident. Teams know that they want to get the ball to Mike Evans, and they've got to be able to shut him down. But with Godwin back, I expect Evans to continue to be this touchdown monster and be able to find himself more, opportunities down the field, hopefully going forward. We have ourselves Robert Woods at number 13. Though Robert Woods' targets aren't the greatest. 5 targets, 4 receptions, that's great. But he always seems to find himself great yardage in a touchdown. 71 yards in a touchdown this past week, 15.1 fantasy points. Plays against the San Francisco 49ers. We've talked about it multiple times on repeat. The San Francisco secondary has been beat up. They have so many injuries that are just basically destroying their secondary to a point that Preston Williams is dominating against them with 4 catches for 100 yards and a touchdown. DeVante Parker, 2 catches, 50 yards and a touchdown. Doesn't even need to do anything, doesn't even try, and he scores. Mike Gesicki torched them last week. If in fact that secondary is still going to be beat up this upcoming week, we'll see how the practice report kind of has them on track. But as of right now, if they're going to be beat up, Robert Woods is going to be able to take advantage of it. He should be fantastic as my number 13 this week. Odell Beckham Jr. is my number 14. We tried it. We tried to leave Odell Beckham Jr. at 29. It didn't work. He didn't have another monster week, unfortunately, but he was still decent. Again, the fact that he's throwing passes and being as great as he was, 9 targets is what I like to see. Opportunities there. 5 receptions for 58 yards. Eventually, it's all going to figure itself out, but they play against Pittsburgh. It's the 4th easiest wide receiver matchup, and I think if anybody's going to take advantage of it, sure, it's going to be Jarvis Landry, but first and foremost, it's Odell Beckham Jr. I think he'll be fantastic this week. He's my number 14 wide receiver on the week. It was only a few games ago where, Odell Beckham Jr. was a monster. Let's not forget what his capability and his ceiling is, especially against great matchups. Going against Dallas, that's one of the easier ones, and so is against Pittsburgh, so should be a great matchup. If a guy like Travis Fulgham and Greg Ward can dominate against this Pittsburgh secondary, I'm expecting Odell Beckham Jr. to also get it done. That's my thought process. DeVante Parker is my number 15. This upcoming week, they take on the New York Jets. It's one of the easier matchups in the game. Again, the New York Jets as a whole are pretty much just folding. They're trying to get that number 1 overall pick. That being the case, here comes Fitzmagic and this fired up offense, ready to win some more games. Fitzpatrick, obviously he's going to send the ball in the direction of DeVante Parker. That is his number 1 target. Obviously, he didn't have to utilize him as much last week because they were up 30 points, right? Why use your number 1 wide receiver when you don't have to? So I think this upcoming week should get some more work. Should be a little bit more of a, I think, competitive matchup considering how badly, San Francisco played. But again, depending who's at quarterback for the Jets, I've seen Sam Darnold, especially last year. I've seen him beat Miami. This isn't, out of the realm of possibility. They could somehow come out and compete here. But again, I still expect DeVante Parker to be able to torch that secondary with relative ease. Number 16. On the other side of the matchup, the New York Jets, Jamison Crowder has been incredible. He's missed 2 games this season, but in the other 3 contests, he's had 100 receiving yards each game. He's had 2 touchdowns in his 3 contests, and even with Joe Flacco this past week, was unbelievable. Had himself, let me read this, 10 total targets for 8 receptions, 116 receiving yards and a touchdown, 21.6 points, takes on Miami's secondary. Now, Miami's secondary is great. Xavier Howard, Byron Jones, they just drafted a first-round cornerback. They've got themselves a lot of talent in the secondary, and that's exactly what Brian Flores is trying to build. But the fact of the matter is, the slot position is something that Jamison Crowder is just better than just about anybody in the National Football League. In terms of slot receivers that really get it done, CeeDee Lamb comes to mind. And of course, Adam Thielen. These are guys that just dominate in the slot position. And they really just, and even Cooper Kupp. But a guy like Jamison Crowder, Though many people think this is kind of random, just go back to last year's stats. He did this all of last season, maybe not at this 100-yard capacity, but he's been this consistent. He's got such a high floor, and his ceiling is always going to be there because, again, this offense is going to at least be able to score once or twice a game, depending on the matchup. But again, should be good to go this upcoming week is my number 16. Number 17, Terry McLaurin, playing against the New York Giants. I think they're they're giving him the 12th most points to opposing wide receivers in a half PPR scoring format. Terry McLaurin didn't really get a fair shake this past week. Obviously, Kyle Allen going down didn't help. Dwayne Haskins being MIA and probably being traded soon doesn't help. And Alex Smith at quarterback does not help because he had 19 passing attempts for 37 passing yards. Not the greatest numbers, but that being said, I think this upcoming week, if Kyle Allen's healthy, ready to go, Terry McLaurin is going to see a lot of targets in his direction. Should be a fun matchup for him. Again, this is a wide receiver that could easily, on 5 targets, make a 100-yard game and a touchdown happen that quickly. He's that talented. Just got to give him the opportunity. Obviously, last week was a matter of circumstance and injury that really was unfortunate for him. Moving on to our next wide receiver, we have ourselves Will Fuller. Again, Will Fuller has really stepped up as the number 1 wide receiver here. And even though Brandin Cooks had himself an incredible game, Will Fuller has still been great. 8 targets, 4 receptions, 58 yards, and a touchdown. That kind of numbers are going to consistently play for this offense. Now that, we have ourselves Deshaun Watson in a little bit of a better situation, the team has a little bit more morale, and they're more willing to at least play for their coach now. Bill O'Brien's gone. Hopefully this offense, the offensive coordinator, they're going to change it up a bit and give themselves more opportunities. Again, this upcoming week playing against Tennessee, Tennessee's defense looked great against Josh Allen. That being said, I know Will Fuller has the ability to take the top off of a defense. So does Brandin Cooks. They're going to be able to spread the secondary thin and then also do exactly what Stefon Diggs. You just make 15-yard comeback routes and just clean up this defense. You just got to protect Deshaun Watson because Clowney's coming for him. Revenge game there. We move on. We have ourselves number 19, Robby Anderson. Now, here's the thing about Robby Anderson. He's the number 1 wide receiver for the Carolina Panthers. It is no argument. 13 targets, 8 receptions, a $112 against the Atlanta Falcons this last week. It's not an argument. He's the number 1 wide receiver. He's going to continue to be until otherwise noted. But he's not even pulling the number 1 coverage at times, which is fantastic. This upcoming week against Chicago, he could be pulling Fuller's coverage. But even then, I think they throw a lot of scenarios at defenses to where they're moving around Robby Anderson, giving him a lot of opportunities. He's got the speed. Even though he looks like he weighs 160 pounds on the field, he is somehow one of the better wide receivers and has really made a huge impact in this Carolina offense regardless. He's getting, 10 targets a game. His yard counts are always up there. And the consistency of targets leading to opportunity and production, him and Teddy Bridgewater seem to be the number 1 and 2 targets there. The number 2 target there being Mike Davis. So it goes Robby Anderson, Mike Davis, then DJ Moore. But either way, Robby Anderson just been incredible the last couple of weeks and has been, a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy for a reason. The thing is, every single week, I think 3 out of the last 5 weeks, Robby Anderson has finished as the number 20 wide receiver in fantasy. So that's why he sits at this number 19 range. Even though he has the potential of upside, he's typically the number 20 guy. He's finished as the number 5 before, but outside of that, he's also finished outside of the top 25. So again, he sits at this range because that's typically where he ends up producing on a weekly basis. Moving on to our next wide receiver, we have ourselves Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp is one of my favorite, but the thing is, unless Cooper Kupp's scoring touchdowns or getting, double the targets or double the receptions, it's not looking great. 8 targets, 5 receptions for 66 yards. You'll get some work on the ground, with these jet sweeps and stuff. But to be honest, Cooper Kupp, unless he's scoring touchdowns or getting usage down the goal line, which Darrell Henderson is pretty much stealing a couple touchdowns a game now, it just seems like Cooper Kupp doesn't have as much of a ceiling as a lot of these other guys at the wide receiver position. While they're getting a lot of touchdowns or an upside of yardage, he's sitting here in the middle of the pack hoping for the upside of yards or the upside of a touchdown rather than guaranteeing it. So as of right now, I'm pretty safe with him at number 20. Against San Francisco, it's a great matchup. Again, their secondary's been beat up. If in fact Jared Goff's able to dice these guys up, should be an easy game and should be able to lead to success for Cooper Kupp. Moving on to another great wide receiver that's playing in the slot position and has been absolutely incredible. As a rookie wide receiver, CeeDee Lamb has just been breaking records. 11 targets, 8 receptions, a $124 this past week. And with Dak Prescott out, the question is where exactly is the ball going to go? But when I think about Andy Dalton and I think about what he was able of, just to produce in Cincinnati. Think about the last 2 years he was in Cincinnati. Tyler Boyd was a 1,000-yard receiver in both those games. And where did Tyler Boyd play? Majority of his snaps coming from the slot position. I really do think that CeeDee Lamb, in comparison to Gallup and Amari Cooper could still be the biggest benefactor of this quarterback change, despite how much Dak Prescott was targeting him on a weekly basis. I really do think the offense is surrounded around the potential success and productivity of CeeDee Lamb being able to just dominate in the slot position. And going forward, this offense may be shifted around a little bit to at least accommodate for Andy Dalton, but I think CeeDee Lamb is still going to be a big part of it, and that's why he plays as my number 21 wide receiver this week. Number 22 is JuJu Smith-Schuster. Despite having the third best matchup at the wide receiver position, JuJu Smith-Schuster hasn't been given opportunity. I mean, he's getting 6, 5, 7 targets a game. That is not enough for a number 1 wide receiver. And maybe the addition of Chase Claypool stepping up and being the number 1 outside receiver for this team could move JuJu Smith-Schuster back at the number 2 spot, move him into the slot, and kind of get him back where he's comfortable the year that he played with Antonio Brown. And he wasn't pulling number 1 coverage. Maybe if they get back to that, he can at least find himself. But having himself 4 catches for 28 yards this past week against Philadelphia of all defenses, that's not exciting enough for me. And I don't think there's enough potential upside there. Hopefully this upcoming week, they shift it around and they get JuJu Smith more opportunities. Unless he's scoring touchdowns this year, he hasn't been as effective. Justin Jefferson is my number 23. Though he was, unfortunately, a little bit of a no-show this past Sunday Night Football against the Seattle Seahawks. I mean, the fact of the matter is that, again, he is still a rookie. He's going to have these games. And if he's only going to get 5 targets in each of the last 2 games, sure, you can catch 4 catches for 100 yards in one and 3 catches for 23 in another. It just depends on what kind of routes you're running, what kind of opportunity you are granted. That being said, it's Atlanta's secondary. Should be a fun one. Adam Thielen's going to be pulling coverage, and Justin Jefferson should find himself some success this upcoming week. I'm not giving up on him just yet. Moving on to our next wide receiver, we have ourselves a Marquise Hollywood Brown. And though he was fantastic this past week, 10 total targets. You love to see that number. He got himself 6 catches for 77 yards and a receiving touchdown. The question is, where exactly can he potentially play every single week on a weekly basis? Is he my slot player? Can I start him every week? That has really been the question. Is it based on matchup? Because, again, Lamar Jackson has been very volatile this year. In terms of the passing game and even on the ground, this offense has not looked nearly as effective as they were last year. I mean, sure, they're winning games, but they haven't played anybody tough. And the one game that they played against a good team, they got smacked by the Kansas City Chiefs. So the question is, at this moment in time, where can we expect to put Marquise Brown? Is he a flex player or is he a starter? As of right now, playing against Philadelphia this week, it is a great matchup. I really do think that there's a potential you could take the top off the defense at any given moment and dominate against the secondary. But if in fact there isn't another wide receiver to complement Marquise Brown on the other side of the field, or the running game isn't pulling enough play action protection, Mark Andrews isn't getting enough opportunity, we might not see enough consistency out of Marquise Brown going forward. I think the matchup's great. I think the potential is great. And that's why I put him at 24, because again, he's still got that decent floor, but I'm looking for upside when I play a guy like Marquise Brown. DJ Moore's my number 25. Though he had a great game against Atlanta, it doesn't mean that he's automatically going to be started every single week from here on out. Chicago's a tougher matchup. 4 catches for 93 yards and a touchdown. That catch that he took on the under route down the sideline for a touchdown is beautiful. That's a 40-yard touchdown. But again, that does not mean that you're going to automatically find success going forward. I mean, Robby Anderson is getting double the targets in comparison to DJ Moore thus far this season. And as of right now, I'm not convinced enough to be able to buy in fully on DJ Moore. I've got to see more from him. Got to see more from him. But regardless, I think the opportunity will eventually come when this offense is starting to at least get themselves in tougher situations. Considering the fact that Mike Davis is catching the ball 10 plus times, that in itself is obviously going to be affecting DJ Moore. And when Christian McCaffrey comes back, I don't think that changes going forward. I'm just hoping the targets that he does get ends up being big plays and helps him out that way. Moving on to DJ Chark, my number 26. Now, here's the thing about Chark. As of right now, he's a little bit injured. He missed today's practice with the ankle injury. And the question is he going to play? Because, again, he's been already banged up earlier this season with a chest injury. He missed that Thursday Night Football game against the Miami Dolphins. There are games that he missed that he could have been fantastic in. And injuries, I can't trust it right now. If, in fact, he practices limitedly or fully in the next coming days and is cleared to play, then I'm willing to play him. But again, let's remember, he is injured, and he is a player that in the past has played through injuries if, in fact, he could, and he doesn't perform well in those games. Just go back to the last 3 games of the 2019 season. He played through an injury there and did not play well at all. His snap counts were limited, and his production was limited in comparison. Moving on, we have ourselves Tyler Boyd at 27. Playing against Indianapolis isn't easy, but hopefully we find Joe Burrow at least producing a little bit more. I mean, that was an awful week. He was getting just he was getting crushed, and it was unfortunate. I think they had 8 sacks against him. I think Tyler Boyd, of course, is the number 1 wide receiver of this team, with A.J. Brown just being a no-show this year. But as of right now, I want to see more opportunity. Tyler Boyd playing in the slot position, only getting 6 targets. Of course, the coverage of the Baltimore Ravens is a big difference maker there. But hopefully this upcoming week it's Indianapolis. We could find ourselves a little bit more production from Tyler Boyd, again, as the number 1 wide receiver of the Cincinnati Bengals offense. Moving on to our next wide receiver, we have ourselves Darius Slayton. And though the Washington football team are pretty good against opposing wide receivers thus far this season, in a half PPR scoring format, the question is, what kind of opportunity are we going to see from Darius Slayton? Are we going to see that kind of a game every single week? I mean, this past week, 11 targets, 8 catches for 129 receiving yards, and on a penalty had a touchdown called back that was going to be a 30-yard touchdown. So again, Darius Slayton could have easily had the number 1 wide, he's not going to pass Chase Claypool this past week, but could have easily had the number 2 wide receiver week in fantasy in week 5 against the Dallas Cowboys. So the potential is there, the opportunity was there. And I think going forward, if in fact we just see Daniel Jones funnel target Darius Slayton, like I talked about last week on trade targets, I wanted to target Darius Slayton because I think going forward, he should be a great option for this offense. And I think he's going to be a great one in week 6. Speaking of Chase Claypool, he was the number 1 wide receiver this past week with 3 receiving touchdowns for 110 receiving yards on 11 targets, 7 receptions, and he had 1 rushing touchdown on the goal line. So the question is, where exactly should we value Chase Claypool? Of course, he's going to be the number 1 waiver wire addition at the wide receiver position this week, and he plays against the Cleveland Browns, one of the easiest matchups at the wide receiver position. But of course, you could score 4 touchdowns in 1 week, then disappear in the following week, just like Marvin Jones did last year. He had 4 touchdowns against Minnesota Vikings. Next week, gone. And that's just how it works. And especially with rookie wide receivers, the volatility is going to be there. But I'm hoping, if in fact Deontay Johnson's going to miss some time, Chase Claypool is going to be given more opportunity and at least have an opportunity to at least prove himself once again in a second week. With Ben Roethlisberger finding a big target like Chase Claypool, again, 6'4", he is a force on the field. And with that secondary being beat up and JuJu Smith-Schuster pulling number 1 coverage, Claypool could be in line for another great week here. I'm hoping the potential is there for many of us. Now, in the exact same matchup, we talk about Jarvis Landry. The Cleveland Browns, yes, their secondary isn't great, but neither is the Pittsburgh Steelers as of right now. And Jarvis Landry, as of the last couple of weeks, has found a little bit of a resurgence. I know earlier in the season, the question was, is he healthy? Is his hip surgery still bothering him? And he has even said multiple times that it has been bothering him, but he's gotten more opportunity over the last couple of weeks. 9 targets this past week, 4 total receptions for 88 receiving yards. Again, those numbers are going to increase, and I think especially in a great matchup as such, where they're going to have to pass the ball in order to keep up against an undefeated Pittsburgh Steelers team. This AFC North matchup should be a pretty exciting one. I think Jarvis Landry is going to be able to at least step up to the task at hand and be able to deliver for Cleveland Browns and your fantasy teams. Let's go ahead and move on to the last couple rankings here for today's video. Starting off with T.Y. Hilton as my number 31. Phillip Rivers is in trouble. And if Phillip Rivers doesn't start getting it done in the passing game, specifically with T.Y. Hilton, Jacoby Brissett's coming soon. I mean, it's not a joke. He's just been horrible. This is a very easy matchup. Cincinnati Bengals have been giving up an incredible amount of points to opposing wide receivers. If you go look up the stats as to which wide receivers, or you know what, I'll go pull it up myself. Let me go ahead and find the stat, and I'll read it to you right now. So the Cincinnati Bengals thus far this season have given up a lot of points to opposing number 1 wide receivers. This past week, Marquise Brown, of course, 77 yards and a touchdown. The week prior, another number 1 wide receiver, DJ Chark, 95 yards and 2 touchdowns. The week before that, Greg Ward, 72 yards and a touchdown. The week before that, Odell Beckham, 74 yards and a touchdown. Again, every single week, number 1 wide receivers have succeeded against the Cincinnati Bengals. It's only a matter of time until T.Y. Hilton does it this week. I expect him to be great. We got to see the production out of Phillip Rivers, though. Michael Gallup's my number 32. The only reason I have him on the list is because, honestly, he was relied upon by Andy Dalton in those last couple of minutes. And really, his clutch catches made the huge difference. And I'm hoping that maybe Michael Gallup, who has been a nothing for many of us thus far this season in fantasy, can maybe turn it on with Andy Dalton going forward. That's the hope. Again, the matchup against the Arizona Cardinals is one of the tougher ones. If, in fact, we have Patrick Peterson on Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup could find himself in a very advantageous situation, hauling in a lot more targets than he has in the past with Dak. Our Julian Edelman is 33. Here's the thing about Julian Edelman. Sure, we don't know who's going to play quarterback, whether it's Brian Hoyer, Jarrett Stidham, but I don't really care, to be honest. Julian Edelman is the offense as of right now. In terms of the passing game, I don't think you can rely upon a N'Keal Harry or a Bird or a James White in the passing game to where Julian Edelman is just going to be ignored. Edelman's going to be pulling in his 10-plus targets, and I hopefully will see that this upcoming week. Denver's secondary is not great. Sure, they have Justin Simmons as a great safety, young guy, but their cornerbacks have been beat up, and they really haven't been able to cover over the last couple of weeks. Hopefully, Julian Edelman can take advantage of that. Has had an extra week of rest. Hopefully, he's healthy, ready to go. Brandin Cooks is my number 34. Had himself a breakout performance. We talked about it in terms of a waiver wire pickup. 12 targets, 8 catches for 161 and a touchdown. This upcoming week takes on Tennessee again. With Will Fuller on the opposite side of the field, these guys are going to complement each other. They're both speedsters. They both have the burners, and they can easily take the top off the defense and easily play against this secondary and at least find some production. I expect him to do so. Hopefully, Brandin Cooks finds himself, a consistent amount of targets. I'm not expecting double digit, but at least 8 per game could help him out, find some fantasy productivity there. Mecole Hardman is my number 35. Again, speaking of speedsters and being able to take the top off of a defense, Mecole Hardman is one of these guys. But with Sammy Watkins out for multiple weeks, quote unquote, there's going to be an opportunity for Mecole Hardman to step up. In the last couple of weeks, he's seen more and more opportunity in terms of red zone touchdowns, receptions, targets. Everything is going up for him. He's taken over this number 3 receiver spot from a Demarcus Robinson, and that's fantastic. And he should fill in perfectly as the number 2 receiver of this offense going forward. Now, the thing is, he's always got the ability to take one pass for 70 yards and score. And that's what I'm hoping for. Of course, I'm looking for upside. But even in his worst productions, Mecole Hardman, it has the volatility. He could have himself a 2-catch, 1-yard game, literally. But I'm hoping that's not the case. I'm hoping they're going to utilize him more and more, use their speed to an advantage against Buffalo, which again could be the biggest difference maker. Laviska Shenault, my number 36 again. If DJ Chark misses, Laviska's kind of given more opportunity. I'd move him up in my rankings accordingly, but as of right now, I still think with DJ Chark healthy and ready to go, he's pulling in more and more targets every single week, gaining more and more comfort with Gardner Minshew, and that in itself, in this offense, is going to lead to fantasy productivity. The touchdowns will eventually get there, and I like the option of Laviska Shenault. Again, this past week had himself 8 total targets, 7 receptions, 79 receiving yards. That's a 10-point play in fantasy and a half PPR. And again, as the weeks progress, we'll find more and more production and more confidence there. Now, if in fact Laviska Shenault does move up, I wanted to mention one more option, I guess my 37th option. If Laviska Shenault moves up in these rankings, I like also Preston Williams. Because if you take out DJ Chark, you move everybody down. Preston Williams is another great option playing against the New York Jets. He found himself some productivity this past week. If in fact he can do so once again, I don't think he's a bad option at all. So those are our top 36 wide receiver rankings for this upcoming week. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I really do appreciate you guys. Click that subscribe button. We're almost at 30K. I really do appreciate it. Again, if you're trying to find more content regarding the channel, anything I make outside of it, rankings, flex rankings, community Discord privately, that is all in the description of the video. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Tomorrow, quarterbacks, tight ends. I'll see you guys. Peace.